What would you do if you inherited your grandfather's 900-acre lake ranch, only to find some HOA Karen-built mansions on your land, then demanded you pay her $15,000 in back dues? I'm Dex Morrison. Drove 14 hours from Denver expecting peace. Got diesel fumes and multiple gaudy mansions squatting on my family's property. Before I could even process what I was seeing, out walks the woman responsible for this nightmare. Vivian Ashworth, HOA dictator, real estate shark, married to the county planning commissioner. Her opening line? "Actually, sweetie, this is my property now. Adverse possession. Look it up." Wrong move, Vivian. She thought she was dealing with some pushover who'd pay up and leave. What she got was a former Marine with detailed records and zero tolerance for thieves. I had grandfather's original deed. She had expensive lawyers and political connections. Seemed like an unfair fight. She was right about that part. By the time I was done, she learned what real adverse possession looks like. What would you have done? Drop it below. Where are you watching from? Let me back up. My grandfather, Rusty Morrison, was a Korean War vet who bought these 900 acres in 1952 with his GI Bill. 3 miles of pristine shoreline, original 1890s cabin, timber rights, the works. His philosophy: keep it wild, keep it free, keep it in the family. I spent summers here as a kid while Grandpa taught me to fish and told stories. When he passed last year, I was deployed overseas and missed the funeral. Took 8 months to finally make the drive from Denver to claim my inheritance. That's when I discovered Vivian's empire. See, Vivian Ashworth moved here from California 5 years ago with plans to improve our backward mountain community. Her husband Fletcher, county planning commissioner. Together, they've been buying lakefront property and flipping it to wealthy transplants at triple the price. The morning I arrived, fresh cedar from her mansion mixed with diesel exhaust in the mountain air, a smell combination that basically screams nature rape in progress. Her white Tesla crunched across what used to be natural beach, now paved with imported Italian stone. "You must be Russell's grandson." She stepped out wearing athleisure that probably cost more than my truck. Manicured nails clicked against a thick legal folder. "I'm Vivian Ashworth, HOA president. We need to talk." "About what?" "Your situation." She gestured at my grandfather's cabin like it was some condemned shack. "This land's been abandoned for years. Under adverse possession law, we now have legal claim. Military training kicked in. Recon first, react second. But her story already had holes. Someone had been paying property taxes. I'd seen the receipts. And her Copper Lake Estates HOA was incorporated after people started building, meaning they claimed authority over land they never owned. "Here's the deal," she said, sliding papers across her Tesla's hood. "Sign this quitclaim deed for 50 grand and walk away, or face expensive lawyers and very connected people." The document was pure fiction. Claimed Grandpa agreed to sell lakefront property for community development, and I was just there to finalize paperwork. I looked at her mansion. The surveyor stakes poking through her landscaping showed she'd built 200 feet onto Morrison property. The woman had literally stolen land to build her dream house. "I'll need time to review this." Her Botoxed face attempted what might have been a smile. "Sweetie, this isn't negotiable. Sign, take the money, go home. Don't make this difficult." Here's what she didn't know. I'd found something interesting in Grandpa's old steamer trunk. Property records going back 70 years. Original surveys. And correspondence with someone who'd been mysteriously paying our taxes for the past 3 years, someone who definitely wasn't Vivian. But the real kicker? I'd also found a 1963 mineral rights lease that was about to expire, worth way more than 50 grand. "One question," I said. "Who exactly lives in all these other houses?" "Successful people. Doctors, lawyers, tech executives, people who appreciate quality development." "And they all agreed to join your HOA?" "Of course." Too quick, too defensive. "Even though half their lots are on my property?" Her perfectly applied makeup couldn't hide the flash of panic. That's a surveying error we're correcting." Right then I knew 2 things. First, Vivian had sold people land she didn't own. Second, she was in way deeper than one illegal mansion. As I drove away, I caught sight of construction equipment near the shoreline and noticed something that made my blood boil. Dark water staining the lake near her property. Her septic system was draining straight into Copper Lake, the same pristine water Grandpa had protected for 70 years. Vivian thought she was dealing with some grief-stricken kid who'd take quick money and disappear. She had no idea what kind of war she'd just started. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of paper rustling under my cabin door. 3 cease and desist letters from Hartwell, Morrison and Associates. apparently Montana's most expensive law firm. Each letter was basically the same threat wrapped in legal jargon. Stop trespassing, stop harassing our client, pay the HOA fees, or face immediate litigation. The smell of fresh ink and intimidation tactics with my morning coffee. Charming. But Vivian wasn't done. By noon, she'd filed a formal adverse possession claim in county court, asking a judge to officially transfer my family's land to her HOA. The paperwork was impressive, 47 pages of surveys, permits, and bylaws that looked official enough to fool someone who didn't know better. I knew better. See, while Vivian was busy playing legal chess, I was doing what Marines do best: reconnaissance. That old steamer trunk in Grandpa's cabin was a goldmine of documentation. Property deeds, survey maps, correspondence. My grandfather kept records like he was expecting exactly this kind of fight. The original 1952 survey was crystal clear. My property line extended 200 feet beyond where Vivian had built her mansion, which meant her Italian marble foyer was literally sitting on stolen land. Back in basic training, our drill sergeant hammered one thing into our heads about enemy tactics: know their weaknesses before they know yours. Turns out that advice applies to property law too. I remembered reading somewhere that adverse possession in Montana requires open, notorious, hostile, and continuous occupation for at least 5 years. The key word being hostile, meaning without the owner's permission. Since Vivian had only been there 3 years and Grandpa never abandoned the property, her claim was about as solid as her fake tan. That afternoon, 2 sheriff's deputies showed up at my cabin. Behind them, Fletcher Ashworth himself, looking like a man who'd rather be anywhere else. "Mr. Morrison," Deputy Williams said, "we've received complaints about you disturbing the peace. Mrs. Ashworth says you've been harassing residents and making threats." I almost laughed. "Threats?" I asked who was paying my property taxes. Fletcher shifted uncomfortably. "Look, son, nobody wants trouble here. Maybe you should consider Mrs. Ashworth's offer. $50,000 is fair money." "Fair for what? My own land?" "Alleged land," Fletcher corrected. "The courts will decide ownership." Right then I understood the game. This wasn't about law or property rights. This was about power, connections, and wearing down someone they thought couldn't fight back. Wrong assumption. After they left, I drove into town to grab supplies and do some research. That's when I met my first ally, Jake Tompkins, local contractor, sitting alone at Murphy's Diner nursing coffee that looked strong enough to strip paint. "You're Russell's grandson," he said as I sat down. "Not a question." "Word travels fast," Jake snorted. "Word is you're fighting Vivian Ashworth. That makes you either very brave or very stupid." He paused, studying my face. "Though I'm hoping for brave, because that woman owes me 30 grand for electrical work on that mansion of hers." The waitress brought me coffee without asking. Small town efficiency at its finest. Jake leaned forward, lowering his voice. "Here's what you need to know about our HOA queen. She's got a system. Hires local contractors, gets the work done, then finds excuses not to pay. Building code violations, permit issues, quality complaints, always something. Most guys can't afford to fight her lawyers, so they eat the loss." "How many contractors has she stiffed?" "At least a dozen that I know of. Woman's turned theft into an art form." Jake pulled out his phone and showed me photos of Vivian's electrical system. Even with my basic knowledge, I could spot problems everywhere. Overloaded circuits, improper grounding, junction boxes that would make a fire marshal weep. "Why hasn't anyone reported this?" "To who?" "Fletcher runs the building department. They're all golf buddies." That's when Jake dropped the bombshell that changed everything. But here's the kicker. I was doing foundation work near the shoreline and found something that'll cook her goose. That fancy septic system, it's completely fake. She's got PVC pipes running straight from her bathrooms into the lake. Raw sewage, toilet paper, everything. Been poisoning your grandfather's pristine water for 2 years. My blood went cold. Environmental violations meant federal jurisdiction, EPA involvement, criminal charges. "You got proof?" Jake grinned and pulled up more photos on his phone. "Brother, I got enough evidence to shut down her whole operation." As I drove back to the cabin, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Take the money and leave town. This is your only warning." I screenshot the message and smiled. Vivian was getting desperate, which meant I was on the right track. The evening mist was rolling off Copper Lake when I pulled into my driveway, carrying that perfect pine scent that made this place worth fighting for. But now I could smell something else underneath it. Something rotten that definitely shouldn't be there. Game on, Vivian. The next morning I found a notice of violation taped to my cabin door. According to the Copper Lake Estates HOA, my grandfather's 130-year-old cabin violated their architectural standards, and I owed $15,000 in immediate compliance fees plus $3,000 in retroactive dues dating back 3 years. The irony was so thick you could spread it on toast. Vivian was demanding HOA fees for a property that predated her fake HOA by 70 years. But here's where it got interesting. The violation notice was signed by someone named R. Morrison as a founding HOA member. Last I checked, that would be my grandfather. Except Grandpa had been dead for a year when this HOA was supposedly founded. Vivian had forged his signature. And honestly, she'd done a terrible job. Grandpa's real signature looked like he was performing surgery with a rusty fork. This one looked like it was written by someone who'd learned cursive from a kindergarten workbook. I spent the morning digging through Grandpa's papers, looking for any HOA documentation. What I found instead made my blood boil. A 2019 letter where Grandpa asked the county assessor why his property taxes had jumped $2,000. Someone had been paying additional development fees on his behalf. Someone who definitely wasn't Grandpa. Around noon, Jake called. "Get down here. Now." I found him at the shoreline behind Vivian's mansion, standing knee-deep in water that looked like chocolate milk and smelled like a backed-up truck stop bathroom. He was wearing rubber gloves and holding a mason jar full of what I really hoped wasn't what it looked like. "Water samples," he said grimly. "Bacteria levels are insane. We're talking serious environmental contamination." The stench hit me like a physical slap. Raw sewage mixed with rotting vegetation and something that smelled suspiciously like bleach. I dealt with some nasty situations overseas, but this was weapons-grade disgusting. How long has this been going on? Based on the buildup, at least 2 years. Jake sealed the jar with the care of someone handling toxic waste. "I used to fish this exact spot as a kid. Water was so clear you could count pebbles at 20 feet. That's when we heard the whine of an ATV approaching. Vivian appeared through the trees, flanked by 2 guys in $1,000 suits who looked like they'd never touched dirt in their lives. "Gentlemen, you're trespassing on private property." "Actually," I said, pulling out my phone's GPS, "according to the 1952 survey, we're standing 50 feet inside Morrison land." Her smile flickered like a dying light bulb. "That survey is outdated. We've had professional resurveying done." "By who?" "Ashworth Development Services." The woman had hired herself to survey her own stolen land. You had to admire the audacity. One of her lawyers stepped forward, a pale, thin guy who looked like he survived on energy drinks and billable hours. "Mr. Morrison, I'm James Hartwell. Perhaps we should discuss this civilly." "Sure. Let's talk about why your client is dumping raw sewage into a public waterway." Hartwell's eye twitched. I'm not implying anything. I'm stating facts." I gestured at the discolored water. "This lake feeds 3 downstream communities. Your client's illegal septic system is poisoning their drinking water." That's when Vivian made her first major mistake. Instead of denying the sewage or claiming ignorance, she went nuclear. "You listen to me, you little nobody." Her perfect facade cracked like cheap paint. "I've invested $2.3 million civilizing this godforsaken wilderness. You think some dead old man's piece of paper gives you the right to destroy progress?" My phone was recording every word. Jake and I exchanged looks as Vivian continued her meltdown. "Ma'am," Jake said politely, "you might want to check those property boundaries before—" "Don't lecture me, you ignorant hillbilly. My husband runs this county. You people are stuck in the past, clinging to romantic notions about pristine wilderness, while the real world moves forward." The lawyers were frantically trying to shut her up, but Vivian was on a roll. She'd just confessed to knowingly polluting the lake, called my grandfather's legal deed worthless, threatened us with political corruption, and thrown in some nice classist insults for flavor, all recorded in high definition. "You know what real development looks like?" she continued, gesturing wildly at her mansion. "Quality construction, proper amenities, people who understand investment value, not some rotting cabin that should have been torn down decades ago." As we walked back to shore, her heels clicking against imported stone like gunshots, I couldn't help but smile. In less than 10 minutes, Vivian had handed me enough evidence to bury her. Environmental crimes, document forgery, corruption threats, and a complete admission of guilt. Sometimes the best strategy is just letting your enemy talk. That night, someone cut my cabin's power lines. I woke up to complete darkness and the sound of footsteps crunching through gravel outside. My phone showed 2:47 a.m. and 0 bars. They'd also taken out the cell tower repeater on my property. Professional work, or at least someone with a YouTube education in sabotage. Through the window, I could see flashlights moving around the shoreline where Jake and I had taken water samples. They were destroying evidence, or trying to. Good thing I'd already uploaded everything to 3 different cloud services. Apparently, these criminal masterminds hadn't heard of the internet. By morning, the damage was clear. Power lines cut, property boundary stakes removed, and "Trespasser" spray painted across my cabin's front door in letters big enough to see from space. The smell of fresh red paint hung in the mountain air like a confession. But here's what they missed. The trail cameras I'd installed after that first threatening text. 12 hours of infrared footage showing Vivian directing the whole operation, including her phone conversation. Make it look like vandalism, nothing that points back to us. Criminal conspiracy, captured in 4K resolution with surprisingly good audio quality. Jake arrived around 8 with coffee and a generator. "Saw the light show last night. Figured you might need backup power." He surveyed the damage and shook his head. "Woman's really committed to this whole criminal mastermind thing, isn't she?" "Gets better. Check this out." I showed him the footage on my laptop. Vivian's face was crystal clear in the infrared, along with Fletcher and 2 guys I didn't recognize. "Holy shit, is that Tommy Clearwater?" Jake squinted at the screen. Sheriff's nephew Tommy was a Marine veteran who'd served 2 tours in Afghanistan. He wasn't going to appreciate being dragged into someone else's felony activities, especially when he found out about it on federal agents' body cameras. My phone buzzed with a text from the same unknown number. "We know you're recording. Delete everything, or your accident-prone cabin might have a fire." I screenshot the thread and smiled. These people were building my case faster than I could document it. Around noon, a black SUV pulled up. 2 federal agents stepped out, and for a split second I wondered if Vivian had somehow convinced them I was the terrorist. "Mr. Morrison, Agent Martinez, EPA Criminal Investigation Division. We understand you've reported environmental violations." That was fast. "We've been monitoring this watershed for 6 months. Anonymous tips about illegal discharge. Your complaint triggered our formal investigation." Her partner, Agent Arden, was already knee-deep in the contaminated water near Vivian's mansion, holding testing equipment that looked more expensive than my truck. "These bacteria levels are off the charts," he called out. "How long has this been going on?" "Based on what I've found, at least 2 years. Agent Martinez showed me satellite photos on her tablet. You could literally watch the contamination spread from Vivian's property like a brown stain across the pristine blue lake. Under the Clean Water Act, contamination at this level carries serious federal penalties. We're talking criminal charges, not just fines. That's when Agent Arden made a discovery that changed everything. He held up a piece of PVC pipe with chemical residue that made my eyes water from 10 feet away. "This isn't just raw sewage. Someone's been dumping industrial cleaning agents directly into the lake, probably trying to mask the bacterial contamination with bleach." I'd encountered similar chemical cocktails during hazmat training. This wasn't accidental overflow from a broken septic system. This was deliberate environmental poisoning, someone actively trying to hide evidence of their crimes by creating new crimes. "Ma'am," Agent Arden continued, "we're looking at potential felony charges. Knowingly discharging pollutants, falsifying environmental reports, conspiracy. Ms. Ashworth could be facing serious federal time." Right on cue, Vivian's Tesla came screaming down the access road like a bat out of hell, spraying gravel in every direction. She jumped out wearing designer athleisure but with the wild-eyed look of someone whose perfect world was imploding in real time. "What is this? Who authorized federal agents on my property?" "Ma'am, we're on Morrison property," Agent Martinez said with the kind of professional calm that comes from dealing with environmental criminals all day. "And we have a federal warrant. This is harassment. My husband will have your badges." Agent Arden looked up from his chemical analysis. "Your husband Fletcher Ashworth? The planning commissioner? He's next on our interview list. Seems he signed permits for septic systems that were never actually built." The sound Vivian made could best be described as a designer tea kettle having a nervous breakdown. As the agents continued collecting evidence, I noticed how eerily quiet the lake had become. No birds, no fish jumping, no insects buzzing. Even nature was holding its breath. Vivian hadn't just stolen my family's land. She'd murdered an entire ecosystem to hide her crimes. But now the feds were here, and they brought handcuffs. 3 days later, while EPA agents were still collecting evidence, I found something in Grandpa's papers that flipped everything upside down. Tucked inside a faded 1963 Christmas card, the kind with glitter that gets everywhere when you touch it, was a mineral rights lease I'd never seen before. Montana Aggregate Company had been paying my family $2,000 a year since 1963 for gravel extraction rights. The lease expired in December 2025, next month, unless renewed by the property owner. Me. Current market rate for gravel rights in Montana, $50,000 a year, minimum. But here's where my blood pressure spiked. The geological survey attached to the lease showed the richest gravel deposits were located directly under Vivian's mansion. Her Italian marble foyer was literally sitting on buried treasure worth millions. The smell of old paper and my grandfather's pipe tobacco still lingered on the documents as I spread them across the cabin table. My hands were shaking, not from cold, but from pure rage at the scope of what I was uncovering. I pulled up county records and started connecting dots that painted a picture uglier than Vivian's turquoise roof. Fletcher Ashworth owned 30% of Rocky Mountain Extraction, a subsidiary of Montana Aggregate Company. The same company that had been quietly paying my family for mineral rights while Fletcher's wife stole the surface land. The whole conspiracy crystallized like ice on the lake. This wasn't about HOA power trips or real estate scams. Vivian and Fletcher had orchestrated a multi-million-dollar heist disguised as adverse possession. Their plan was gorgeous in its simplicity. Steal the land through legal manipulation, then renew the mineral lease to themselves at basement prices. With exclusive access to premium gravel deposits, Fletcher's extraction company could corner the entire regional construction market. I started running numbers on my phone. 500,000 tons of gravel at $15 per ton meant roughly $7.5 million in total value. Even extracted over 20 years, they were looking at generational wealth. No wonder Vivian was willing to build a $2.3 million mansion on disputed property. The house was just window dressing. She was really building a vault over buried treasure. Everything made sense now. Fletcher fast-tracking her permits. The HOA formed after construction started. Vivian's confidence about adverse possession. They thought they had every angle covered except one, the actual property owner showing up with a functioning brain. I called Hank Caulfield, the retired attorney who'd offered help. Hank, question about mineral rights law. If someone steals land with valuable minerals and they know about the minerals beforehand, how screwed are they legally? That would be conspiracy to commit fraud, federal crime with serious prison time. Why? What if the thief is married to a county official who used his position to help? Long pause. Son, that's RICO territory. Organized crime charges, asset forfeiture, the whole federal hammer. What exactly did you find? I walked him through the mineral lease and Fletcher's ownership stake. The silence on the other end stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. Dex, you're not dealing with petty theft. This is a federal conspiracy worth millions. These people committed multiple felonies to steal your inheritance. What's my play? Document everything, confront nobody, sign nothing, and pray they don't realize you've figured it out before we can get federal prosecutors involved. After hanging up, I sat in Grandpa's chair staring at Vivian's mansion through the window. She'd built her monument to greed on top of a fortune she was trying to steal, using permits signed by her co-conspirator husband. The woman who'd called me a little nobody had just handed me leverage worth more than her entire criminal empire. Game over, Vivian, you just don't know it yet. The next morning, I assembled my war council at the volunteer fire station. Hank, legal strategy; Jake, construction evidence; Marge the historian, community intel; Sheriff Tommy Clearwater, law enforcement; and Sarah Blackhorse from the tribal council, environmental angle. The smell of stale coffee and decades-old cigarette smoke hung in the air like the ghosts of 1,000 emergency meetings. All right, Hank said, spreading documents across a folding table that had probably seen more drama than a soap opera. Here's how we dismantle Vivian's criminal empire. Step 1. Financial strangulation. He pulled out a legal form that looked intimidating enough to make lawyers nervous. This beauty is called lease pendens, Latin for lawsuit pending. We file this tomorrow morning and suddenly Vivian can't sell or refinance her mansion. No access to equity means no money for expensive lawyers or sudden trips to non-extradition countries. Jake started sketching property boundaries on a whiteboard with the enthusiasm of someone planning the world's most satisfying revenge. Physical strategy. Professional surveyor stakes every 50 feet marking the true property lines, bright orange flags showing exactly how much of her luxury development is built on stolen land. Visual impact? Picture this, drone footage of her mansion surrounded by a forest of orange flags like some kind of property crime scene. Media's gonna love it. Sarah leaned forward, tribal council pin catching the fluorescent light. Environmental pressure runs parallel. EPA's building their case, but we're adding university water testing for academic credibility. Every sample documented with chain of custody procedures that would make CSI jealous. The math was beautiful in its brutality. 2 years of pollution at $37,500 per day meant Vivian was looking at over $27 million in potential environmental fines before we even got to the criminal charges. Marge, taking notes in handwriting that belonged in the Smithsonian, spoke up with the quiet authority of someone who'd organized church potlucks that could feed armies. Community mobilization. Copper Lake Heritage Day this Saturday. Food trucks, live music, historical displays. Right smack in the middle of Morrison property. How's that help? 300 witnesses watching us install boundary markers. News crews getting feel-good environmental stories. Politicians desperate to look green. Creates a situation where Vivian looks like the villain for trying to shut down a community celebration. Tommy Clearwater had been quietly listening, but now he leaned back with the kind of predatory smile that meant someone was about to learn why you don't mess with Marine veterans who become sheriffs. Here's your Christmas present. Building department red-tagged her mansion this morning. Turns out all that electrical work Jake documented, none of it was properly permitted. Place is legally uninhabitable. She can't live there? Not without violating about 12 different safety codes. Insurance is void, mortgage company's been notified, and Fletcher's trying to fix it, but 3 federal agents asking about permit fraud makes county employees suddenly very careful about paperwork. Jake pulled up photos on his tablet, grinning like someone who'd just found the crown jewels in a garage sale. Woman's been living in a $2 million fire hazard, overloaded circuits, improper grounding, septic lines that wouldn't pass inspection at a trailer park. Something clicked in my mind from my electrical training days. In Montana, property owners are liable for all construction defects, even contractor work. Since Vivian had stiffed most of her workers, she couldn't even blame anyone else for the violations. She'd screwed herself with her own cheapness. Sarah spread out a watershed map that looked like a medical diagram of a dying patient. Tribal angle adds federal treaty violations. Her pollution killed fish populations we've harvested since 1855. Any development affecting tribal fishing rights requires federal consultation under the Hellgate Treaty. More federal charges? Hank's eyes lit up like he'd just discovered buried treasure. These people are getting buried under so many violations they'll need archaeologists to dig them out. We spent 2 hours coordinating the perfect storm. Media interviews Friday. Professional surveying Saturday morning. Water testing timed with festival coverage. Legal filings creating a paper avalanche that would bury Vivian's lawyers in billable hours. Psychological warfare, I added. Every legal filing, every boundary marker, every news interview sends one message. We have evidence, we have community support, and we're not going anywhere. The beauty was its multiple pressure points hitting simultaneously. Legal attacks on property theft, environmental crimes, building violations, and federal conspiracy. Community pressure through the Heritage Festival. Media pressure through environmental stories. Financial pressure through the Liz Pendens freezing her assets. What if she tries to disrupt the festival? Marge asked. Tommy's smile got downright predatory. She shows up causing trouble at a permitted community event with 300 witnesses and live TV coverage? Please. I've been hoping she'd do something that stupid. As we packed up evidence files and battle plans, the late afternoon sun slanted through dusty windows, casting long shadows across our strategy documents. Saturday was 3 days away. Time to spring the trap. Thursday night, I woke up to the sound of breaking glass and the acrid smell of gasoline. Someone had thrown a Molotov cocktail through my cabin window, except they'd apparently learned arson techniques from YouTube because it landed in the metal sink and fizzled out like a wet firecracker. The note tied to the bottle was more threatening than the actual bomb. Last warning, leave now or next time we won't miss. I called Tommy Clearwater, who arrived 20 minutes later with a crime scene kit and the kind of professional calm that comes from dealing with amateur criminals. Motion-activated cameras catch anything? Everything. I pulled up the footage on my laptop. Vivian's Tesla pulling up at 2 a.m., Fletcher in the passenger seat, both of them wearing dark clothes like they were auditioning for the world's worst heist movie. Attempted arson, criminal threats, conspiracy. Tommy bagged the evidence with latex gloves. Federal agents are gonna love this. Nothing says we're guilty, quite like trying to burn down the witness. But Vivian wasn't done making terrible decisions. Friday morning, she held a press conference outside the county courthouse, flanked by her expensive lawyers and looking like someone who'd discovered the internet was posting unflattering photos of her. This is a coordinated attack on property rights by environmental extremists and outside agitators, she declared to the 3 local reporters who'd shown up. My family has invested millions in improving this community, only to face harassment and intimidation from people who want to keep Montana in the dark ages. The irony was so thick you could mine it for minerals. The woman who'd moved here from California was calling me an outside agitator for inheriting my grandfather's land. But here's where her media strategy backfired spectacularly. One of the reporters was Amanda Arden from the Missoula Environmental Desk, who'd been following the lake pollution story for weeks. Mrs. Ashworth, how do you respond to EPA findings that your property has been illegally discharging raw sewage into Copper Lake for over 2 years? Vivian's perfectly applied makeup couldn't hide the flash of panic. Those are preliminary findings based on biased testing by people with an agenda. The testing was done by federal agents using EPA-certified equipment. Well, if there are any violations, they're minor technical issues that we're addressing. Amanda pulled out her tablet. According to the EPA report, bacteria levels near your property are 800% above safe limits. Fish populations have collapsed throughout this section of the lake. How is mass environmental destruction a minor technical issue? That's when Vivian made the mistake that would end up on every news broadcast in Montana. Instead of deflecting or claiming ignorance, she went full villain mode. You people act like this lake was some pristine paradise before we arrived. It was nothing, just stagnant water surrounded by worthless scrubland. We brought civilization, jobs, economic development. Sometimes progress requires short-term sacrifices for long-term benefits. The sound of jaws dropping was audible. She'd just admitted to knowingly destroying the environment for profit on camera in front of 3 reporters and 2 federal agents who'd shown up to serve more warrants. By Friday afternoon, the video had gone viral on social media with captions like, HOA, Karen admits to environmental terrorism, and rich lady thinks lakes are nothing. The comment sections were brutal enough to make a Marine drill sergeant blush, but Vivian's legal problems were just getting started. Around 3 p.m., a convoy of federal vehicles pulled up to her mansion like they were serving warrants on a drug cartel. FBI, EPA Criminal Investigation Division, IRS, and U.S. Marshals. Basically every federal agency that enjoys ruining white-collar criminals' weekends. I watched from my cabin as agents carried out box after box of evidence. Financial records, construction documents, computer hard drives, even her cell phone. The woman who'd threatened to sue me into oblivion was now watching her entire life get loaded into federal evidence bags. Fletcher tried to intervene using his position as county commissioner, which turned out to be another spectacular miscalculation. Nothing quite says abuse of office like trying to obstruct a federal investigation while wearing your official county jacket. Sir, you need to step back, Agent Martinez told him with the kind of professional politeness that carries an implied threat of handcuffs. Do you know who I am? I'm an elected official in this county. Yes, sir, we're well aware of your position. That's actually why you're also under investigation. The sound Fletcher made was somewhere between a whimper and the noise a balloon makes when you let the air out slowly. By evening, my phone was buzzing with messages from reporters, environmental groups, and people I'd never heard of who wanted to share their own HOA horror stories. The local news had picked up the story, then regional outlets, and now it was trending on social media across the entire Mountain West. Vivian had wanted to be the queen of her little lakefront empire. Instead, she'd become the poster child for everything wrong with wealthy transplants who think money gives them the right to destroy whatever they want. Tomorrow was Heritage Day. 300 people, multiple news crews, and a community ready to watch justice get served with a side of local barbecue. The trap was set. All we had to do was wait for Vivian to walk into it. Saturday morning arrived with the kind of crisp mountain air that made you believe in new beginnings, until Vivian showed up at 6 a.m. with a demolition crew and what looked like half the county's construction equipment. Emergency demolition, she announced to the volunteer fire department security team I'd hired. Structural safety hazard requires immediate intervention. The irony was beautiful. The woman who'd built an illegal mansion on stolen land was now claiming she had to tear down my grandfather's perfectly sound cabin for safety reasons. Jake arrived with his own crew and professional surveying equipment, taking one look at Vivian's demolition permit before starting to laugh. This permit's for a different property. She's literally trying to demolish the wrong building. Does that surprise anyone at this point? I asked, watching Vivian direct her crew like some kind of manic orchestra conductor in designer safety gear. By 8 a.m., the Heritage Festival setup was in full swing, despite Vivian's attempted disruption. Food trucks lined the access road, volunteers were setting up historical displays, and Sarah Blackhorse's tribal drummers were performing sound checks that echoed across the lake like heartbeats. That's when federal agents arrived, not to arrest anyone, but to collect more evidence. Agent Martinez set up a mobile command post that looked more sophisticated than most small-town police departments. Water quality testing in real time, she explained, showing me tablet displays with constantly updating data. Every violation documented as it happens. Your friend Mrs. Ashworth just provided us with enough evidence to support criminal charges. Vivian's demolition crew had stirred up the contaminated sediment near her septic discharge, creating a toxic plume visible from space. The timing couldn't have been more perfect. Hundreds of festival goers watching environmental destruction happen in real time. Around 10 a.m., the media circus reached peak absurdity. Amanda Arden was interviewing tribal elders about traditional fishing practices while Vivian screamed at her demolition crew in the background. The contrast was striking. Indigenous wisdom about environmental stewardship versus entitled destruction of sacred waters. But Vivian's morning meltdown was just the opening act. Fletcher arrived around noon with 2 county vehicles and what looked like an eviction notice, apparently deciding that his wife's legal problems were his problems too. "Mr. Morrison," he announced with the kind of official pomposity that screams compensating for something, "this gathering exceeds permitted capacity and poses safety hazards to county residents." Tommy Clearwater stepped forward wearing his full sheriff's uniform and the expression of someone who'd reached his limit with corrupt officials. "Commissioner Ashworth, this event has all proper permits and professional security. Unless you have a court order, I suggest you leave." "I am a county commissioner." "You're under federal investigation for conspiracy and abuse of office. I'd be very careful about giving me orders right now." The crowd of festival goers had been watching this drama unfold like the world's most entertaining reality TV show, but now things got serious. Fletcher pulled out his phone and started making calls, apparently trying to get state authorities to shut down the festival. That's when Sarah Blackhorse played the trump card we'd been saving. "Commissioner Ashworth," she called out in a voice that carried across the entire crowd, "I have something you might find interesting." She held up a document that looked official enough to frame. "Federal court injunction filed this morning. Any interference with tribal treaty rights regarding this watershed constitutes contempt of federal court. The penalty is immediate arrest and detention." Fletcher's face went through several interesting color changes before settling on the shade of green that usually precedes projectile vomiting. The injunction was real. Sarah's tribal legal team had worked through the night to get federal protection for the Heritage Festival, citing environmental restoration and traditional fishing rights. Anyone who tried to stop the event would be violating federal law. By 2 p.m., the festival had turned into something nobody could have predicted. What started as community organizing had become a spontaneous celebration of environmental justice. Local bands were playing, kids were learning about water conservation, and elderly residents were sharing stories about the lake before Vivian's pollution. But the real drama was happening at Vivian's mansion. Her demolition crew had accidentally ruptured a main septic line, sending raw sewage flooding across her manicured lawn and into the lake. The smell was indescribable, like someone had weaponized a truck stop bathroom. Federal agents immediately cordoned off the area as a hazardous waste site. Vivian was standing in her designer boots, ankle-deep in her own sewage, screaming at contractors who were backing away from the toxic disaster she'd created. "This is sabotage!" she shrieked at anyone within earshot. "Someone deliberately damaged my property!" Agent Martinez approached with the kind of professional documentation that makes defense attorneys weep. "Ma'am, based on our investigation, this septic system was never properly installed. You've been illegally discharging waste for over 2 years." The crowd watching from the festival could see everything. Vivian's mansion surrounded by hazmat tape, federal agents in protective gear, and sewage flowing into the lake she'd claimed to be improving. As the afternoon sun slanted across the contaminated water, I realized we'd reached the perfect moment. 300 witnesses, live media coverage, federal agents collecting evidence, and Vivian standing in her own waste while claiming to be the victim. Time for the final confrontation. At 4 p.m., just as the Heritage Festival was reaching its peak energy, Vivian made her final fatal mistake. She commandeered the festival's public address system. "Attention, everyone!" Her voice crackled through the speakers with the kind of desperate authority that comes from watching your empire collapse in real time. "You're all trespassing on private property. This illegal gathering ends now." The crowd of 300 fell silent, creating one of those movie moments where you could hear a pin drop, or in this case, hear the distant whir of news helicopter rotors and the splash of contaminated water lapping against the shoreline. I stepped forward, pulling out the original 1952 property deed that had started this whole adventure. "Actually, Vivian, they're on Morrison property. Same property your mansion is built on. Same property you've been stealing for 3 years. The crowd murmured like a jury that just heard damning evidence. Amanda Arden's camera crew moved closer, capturing every word in high definition for the evening news. "That deed is worthless," Vivian shrieked, her perfect facade finally cracking like cheap paint. "This land was abandoned. I improved it. I brought civilization to this wasteland." That's when Agent Martinez stepped forward with a folder thick enough to stop bullets. "Mrs. Ashworth, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, environmental crimes under the Clean Water Act, and violation of federal treaty rights." The handcuffs clicking shut echoed across the lake like gunshots. But Vivian wasn't done. Even with her wrists cuffed behind her back, she kept talking, apparently unaware that every word was being recorded by multiple news crews and uploaded to social media in real time. "You don't understand what real development looks like," she screamed at the crowd. "I spent millions trying to fix this place. You people want to stay poor and backwards, living in shacks like your ancestors." The silence that followed was deafening. Even her own lawyers were backing away from the racist meltdown happening in front of 300 witnesses and 4 news cameras. Tommy Clearwater approached Fletcher, who'd been trying to edge toward his county vehicle. "Commissioner Ashworth, you're also under arrest for conspiracy, abuse of office, and obstruction of a federal investigation." The sound Fletcher made when the handcuffs clicked on could best be described as the noise a deflating balloon makes if the balloon had delusions of grandeur. But the climax wasn't over. As federal agents led Vivian toward their vehicle, she made one final attempt at claiming victim status. "This is a witch hunt," she yelled at Amanda Arden's camera. "I'm being persecuted for being successful, for having vision, for trying to bring Montana into the 21st century." That's when Sarah Blackhorse stepped forward with the quiet dignity that comes from representing people who've been protecting this land for centuries before any white settlers arrived. "Mrs. Ashworth," she said in a voice that carried clearly across the water, "you didn't bring civilization to this place. You brought pollution, theft, and corruption. Our people have been civilized here for over 1,000 years. You've been here 3 years and managed to poison an entire ecosystem." The crowd erupted in applause that lasted so long the news helicopter pilot probably heard it from 1,000 feet up. As agents loaded Vivian into the federal vehicle, she caught sight of the demolition crew trying to clean up the sewage disaster at her mansion. The toxic smell drifted across the festival grounds like a physical reminder of everything she'd done wrong. "You haven't won anything," she screamed through the car window. "I'll appeal. I'll sue. I have connections, money, lawyers." Agent Martinez closed the car door with the finality of a coffin lid, but not before Vivian got one last parting shot. "You'll never be anything but a nobody from nowhere." I walked over to the car window and pulled out my phone, showing her the screen. Her racist rant was already trending on social media with over 50,000 shares. Environmental groups across the country were sharing the video of her arrest. News outlets from Denver to Seattle were picking up the story. "You're right about one thing, Vivian," I said loud enough for the cameras to catch. "I am just a nobody from nowhere. But this nobody just took down your entire criminal empire with his grandfather's property deed and some basic respect for the law." The federal vehicle pulled away, carrying Vivian toward a future that included federal prison, environmental cleanup costs that would bankrupt her, and the kind of national infamy that follows people who poison lakes while claiming to bring civilization. As the dust settled and the crowd gradually returned to celebrating, I found myself standing at the shoreline where this all began. The water still showed signs of Vivian's contamination, but EPA agents assured me the lake would recover. Justice served, with a side of mountain air and the sound of loons calling across water that would soon run clean again. 6 months later, I was standing on the deck of my grandfather's renovated cabin, watching the sunrise paint Copper Lake in shades of gold and silver. The water was running clear again thanks to the EPA's aggressive cleanup, funded entirely by Vivian's seized assets. The federal case wrapped up faster than anyone expected. Faced with overwhelming evidence and viral video of her racist meltdown, Vivian took a plea deal: 18 months in federal prison, $2.8 million in restitution for environmental cleanup, and 5 years probation. Fletcher got 12 months and permanent disqualification from holding public office. The mansion, demolished by court order after the structural inspection revealed violations that would have made building inspectors weep. Turns out, when you stiff all your contractors and skip proper permits, you end up with a $3 million death trap. But the real victory was what happened next. The Morrison Conservation Trust, funded by mineral lease revenues, now protects the entire 900-acre property in perpetuity. We partnered with the university to establish a field research station where students study lake ecosystem recovery. Sarah Blackhorse helped design programs that combine traditional indigenous knowledge with modern environmental science. The annual Copper Lake Heritage Day has become a regional celebration, drawing over 2,000 visitors each summer. Local businesses that were struggling before Vivian's reign of terror are now thriving from sustainable tourism. Jake's Honest Contractor Verification Service has expanded to 3 counties, helping homeowners avoid the kind of fraud Vivian perfected. The scholarship program Grandpa would have loved the most. Every year, the trust funds 3 full-ride college scholarships for local kids studying environmental science, sustainable development, or trades that help communities thrive without destroying their natural resources. Hank Caulfield wrote his property rights guidebook, Fighting Back, a rural landowner's legal toolkit, which has been downloaded over 100,000 times and helped dozens of families fight similar land grabs. The Vivian laws passed by the Montana legislature now require verified consent before HOA membership and criminalize retroactive fee collection. Amanda Arden's documentary about the case won an Environmental Journalism Award and sparked legislation in 12 states, strengthening protections for rural property owners. The PBS special has been viewed by over 3 million people, turning our little lake into a symbol of environmental justice. As for me, I kept my day job as an electrician but moved permanently to the cabin. Turns out mountain air and the sound of loons make excellent therapy for everything the military left behind. I've become the Conservation Trust's full-time manager, splitting my time between environmental education and making sure no future Vivians get their claws into our community. The lake itself has staged an incredible recovery. Fish populations are back to healthy levels, water clarity has improved dramatically, and the federal environmental disaster designation was lifted ahead of schedule. Scientists are using our cleanup as a model for similar restoration projects across the country. Last month, I got a letter from Vivian in federal prison. She's apparently found religion and wanted to apologize for any misunderstandings about the property situation. The letter included a request for a character reference for her parole hearing. I wrote back with a single line. Adverse possession works both ways. I'm now in possession of your former life, and I'm using it to protect everything you tried to destroy. The letter came back marked, Return to Sender. Every morning, I sit on the deck with coffee and read Grandpa's letters while watching the sunrise over water that runs clean and clear again. His favorite phrase was, keep it wild, keep it free, keep it in the family. And that's exactly what we've done. Except now, family includes everyone who loves this place enough to protect it. The Conservation Trust ensures that no future developers, HOA tyrants, or environmental criminals can touch this land. It will stay wild and free forever, supporting research, education, and community celebration for generations to come. Sometimes the best revenge is building something so beautiful and permanent that your enemy's destruction becomes the foundation for lasting good. Share your own HOA nightmare stories in the comments. You might be next week's episode. And subscribe for more David vs. Goliath victories where the good guys actually win. The loons are calling across pristine water, and justice sounds a lot like home.